Tennessee football is transitioning to preparation mode for its season opener against Virginia. John and I are still in prediction mode here on this edition of the Volunteer State. Welcome in. I'm Blake Toppmeyer alongside the Knoxville News Sentinel's John Adams. Adam Sparks is unfortunately absent from us this week, dealing with internet outages tied to the storm damage that he sustained at his place from the tornado that rolled through Knoxville. However, we have a voice from afar. Mr. Sparks has given me his opinion on the topics we will be discussing today, so I will be revealing his answers as a secret envelope reveal to reveal Adam's predictions and show how far off the mark maybe John and I are. I'm a little worried about this, John, because if Adam were here, we could kind of debate against some of his opinions. Now he's just going to look like this genius from behind the curtain with a different answer and this typed up rationale for his answer that he sent in that's going to be hard to refute without him having to defend himself on the podcast here.
Yes, it's akin to getting instead of an answer to a question if you're trying to do a story, you get a statement.
Right. Yes, the emailed statement.
This is Adams. And one thing about in Adams' backyard was hit hard by this storm, and I sympathize with Adam and Bev, but the people that are doing this work out there, I wonder if they know who Adam Sparks is. I mean, he's a big deal around here.
And, yes, he is, and that's why we've got his answers to prove us wrong and make us look foolish. Today, we're going to predict some statistical leaders for Tennessee. A couple categories on offense, a couple categories on defense, and then also a Joe Milton specific prediction. So John and I will go, and then we will reveal what Adam's answer or his prediction is as well. So let's start on offense, John, and let's start with Tennessee's leading rusher. Now, they return their top three running backs from last season, including their leading rusher in Jalen Wright. So he would be the naturally easy choice, but another veteran back as well in Jabari Small. He was about 150 yards behind Jalen Wright's total last year. So how about this? How about you bat leadoff on rushing, and then I'll go first on the next category, and Adam gets the final say from the envelope in each of these. So who are you predicting will be Tennessee's leading rusher?
Blake, I will go with Jalen Wright. Tennessee has a great 1-2 punch in Jalen Wright and Jabari Small, and I also think they're going to get more help this season as well from Dylan Sampson. So this is it's a pretty secure position, although you can get running back attrition really fast sometimes. However, I'll go with Jalen Wright. To me, the advantage he has, more big play capability over Jabari Small. And I don't mean to knock Jabari Small because I think he's a good, tough runner. And I like having the two of them back there. It's a great 1-2 punch. But just because of that, he might break a big play or two that Jabari Small wouldn't. So I would pick Jalen Wright.
Okay, I know we're going to have some differences at some point, but it's not going to be on this category. I agree with you in Jalen Wright. I everything you just said, John. 1-2 punch is there. Tennessee's really blessed at this position. They're not going to have a first-team All-SEC running back, but they have a few proven options. Jabari Small, it seems like he's been here since the Butch Jones days. It really isn't that long, but he's gotten a lot of playing time over the years, and he does date back to the Jeremy Pruitt days. And you mentioned it with him. He can get you that tough yardage. His durability is maybe not as proven as Jalen Wright's. He's dealt with some injuries over the years. He's a tough runner, so that's probably part of it. But Jalen Wright, he's the leader in the clubhouse as the leading rusher from last season, and I see no reason to change that pick. So I will go with that. And revealing Adam's answer here, he says Jalen Wright as well. And boy, you passed with flying colors here, John, because he said Jalen Wright. leading rusher last year. Also, the big play ability helps tip the scales for Jalen Wright for him. And you mentioned that as well. And Adam also mentioned past injury issues with Jabari Small as being another reason why he went with Jalen Wright. So we're in unison there. That might have been the easiest prediction of the three here, I think. So let's flip over to one on defense. Let's go to leading tackler for Tennessee. Now, much like the rushing situation, Tennessee's tackles leader earns this season. That's Aaron Beasley, who is switching linebacker spots, though. He's moving into that Jeremy Banks weak side linebacker role, which we saw him play in the Orange Bowl, Aaron Beasley, and it was great for him. He had 12 tackles in that game, was really pressuring the quarterback as well. So no reason to think that switching from middle linebacker to weak side linebacker will necessarily affect Aaron Beasley's numbers. In fact, his tackle count might increase. But also, Tennessee added an important transfer in middle linebacker, Keenan Peely of BYU. So I will bat lead off here, and you can play off me, and we'll see where Adam goes. I'm actually going to swim a little bit upstream on this one. I think it's the maybe the riskier pick, and I'm going to go with Peely. In the middle of the defense, I'll say he just barely edges out Beasley in that tackle total. I think those guys will be 1-2. I think they're going to play a ton of snaps. Peely, he does have to prove himself at the SEC level. However, coming from BYU, where he was number 3rd on the team in tackles last year, we know BYU plays a really strong schedule. You look at it last season, they played Oregon, they played Notre Dame, they played Arkansas, Boise State, Liberty, Baylor. Like, it's going to be a step up in the SEC, sure, but BYU plays physical football games, so it's not going to be a total 180 for Peely. Being right in the heart of it all, I'm going to go with him to just barely edge out Aaron Beasley in the tackle total.
Yeah, that's a tough question. I think, though, my first inclination was to go the way you did with Peely, because he will be the primary run stopper. However, I go back to the Orange Bowl when Beasley had 12 tackles. I think he's a very intuitive player, and that role will serve him well. He'll be better at that position than Jeremy Banks was. I don't have any doubt about that. And Jeremy Banks put up pretty big numbers. So I think Aaron Beasley will be the leading tackler.
Okay. All right. I don't have too much objection to that. I was that may have been the one I was debating the most is leading tackler. I almost went Beasley, but thought I'd go out on a little more of a limb and go with the newcomer Peely. Looking at Adam's answer here, he also says Beasley, so you are 2 for 2 in agreeing with Adam, John, which might be the safe place to be. Adam thinks Beasley is going to be even more well-suited for that weak side linebacker role than he was at middle linebacker. So he led the team in tackles last year at his old spot. Adam likes what he saw from Beasley in the Orange Bowl, so he is picking him without hesitation to lead the team in tackles again. Let's flip over, John, back to offense. And Tennessee has to replace its leading receiver, Jalen Hyatt. Last year, the Biletnikoff winner had more than 1,200 receiving yards, almost double the number 2 total. It wasn't like Tennessee lacked for good supporting receivers, but Jalen Hyatt as a deep threat really piled up the yards. He led in yards, he led in receptions, he led in touchdowns by a landslide with 15. Got to replace that. So, probably 3 or 4 options, I feel like, on this one and leading receiver. And I've already got my pick locked in, but I'm going to make you go first.
Well, I love Tennessee's receiving core. I think it can be even better than last year. And I think it's Dante Thornton, the transfer from Oregon, will fit in and will give it a little more depth. I know Josh Heupel likes to go with the same group, but I think he will sub for those guys on varying series. So I think you'll have great production from all 4. But I like Squirrel White. It's great in the in the Orange Bowl. He's got speed. He's got quickness. The thing about Heupel's offense, he gets players open. He gets receivers open. And Squirrel White in the open field will be a handful. So I think some 20-yard pass completions could turn into 60-yard touchdowns with him. But I easily could pick Brew McCoy, and Ramel Keaton has a great relationship with Joe Milton, the quarterback. They worked together as backups last season, and Keaton has gotten better and better and better. So any one of those guys could come up, maybe have the most catches. But I'll go with the potential big play threat in Squirrel White.
Yeah, you mentioned the four there that I think are candidates for this, with Squirrel White and Brew McCoy maybe are the two biggest headliners, but then also Ramel Keaton as well in that conversation, and Dante Thornton, who we talked about a lot last week as the newcomer from Oregon, who's really getting a lot of rave reviews. If you listen to different sources from outside the program throughout the preseason, so 4 good options. I really thought about Squirrel White too, John, and he may well be the guy because of his ability, I think, to get downfield, take the top off the defense, and we know how much Josh Heupel likes dialing up the deep threats, and we know Joe Milton certainly can chuck it up to 80 yards if he's got the time to do so. But I went with what I thought might be the safest choice here, and I went with Brew McCoy. He was number 2 on the team last year in receptions, number 2 in receiving yards. He can, he can catch the passes downfield, but he's a little bit more of a possession receiver than some of these take the top off the defense guys. So I do worry about maybe, I don't know if worry is the right word. It doesn't really matter to me that much whether I'm right about this. But I do think there's a possibility that someone who has maybe more downfield potential does lead. But I'll take the guy that I think is going to lead them in receptions to also lead in receiving yards, and go with maybe the safest choice in Brew McCoy. The other thing, John, is I wonder if Dante Thornton will take any snaps from Squirrel White. Certainly Josh Heupel could play 4 wideouts and put 4 out there together in a certain package. But, I do wonder, last year Jalen Hyatt really wasn't sharing much time. He was logging a lot of snaps till he didn't play there at the end of the season. But if Thornton cuts into Squirrel's snaps at all, I think that's advantage Brew McCoy, because I think he could be the snap count leader at the position. So before we get to Adam's pick, what do you think about me going with Brew rather than Squirrel?
Oh, I don't have any problem with that. One of the things I most like about this receiving core is I think their skill sets complement one another so well. It's a very diverse group. You talked about Squirrel having that deep play speed. Brew McCoy has a great ability. If it's a jump ball and he has to go up and beat a defender one-on-one, he's so strong. I see him winning those battles far more often than not. And I think Ramel Keaton is a guy that also can go deep, and he can make tough catches. He's willing to sacrifice his body to make difficult catches. So then you add in Dante Thornton, who seemingly has speed and height. I just really like this receiving core.
I do too. I think there's a number of good choices to answer this question, and that brings us to Adam's selection. And it's as if, John, you guys were conferring about this before the podcast. Did that happen? Did you not fill me in that one of you was cheating off the homework or the other? Because I was not clued into that cheating situation there. Because you guys are you're 3 for 3. He went with Squirrel White as well. So who's copying off who here?
Well, I mean, I'm much older than Adam, and I wonder if maybe he looks at me as a mentor. Yeah,
so many sports writers have come and gone at KnoxNews over the years, John, that I know considered you a mentor, and some of our readers are convinced that you are behind the curtain or a puppet master pulling the strings on all of us. I know maybe that is the case with Adam.
No, I think you had the appropriate reaction. You laughed loudly. when I said I wondered if Adam sees me as a mentor. Uh, he doesn't need any mentoring. So, but that's interesting that we have. Maybe you just want to be different. Maybe you're the contrarian in the group.
Yeah, perhaps I'm thinking of the entertainment value of this podcast and trying to predict what others will say, so I say something different, right? But no, Adam, for reasons that we've talked about here, Squirrel White's deep play, deep threat ability, and Adam not only thinks Squirrel's going to lead in yards, but he says he's going to lead in receptions as well, which would put him in the Jalen Hyatt category. Hyatt led in receptions, yards, and touchdowns, had the clean sweep there. So Adam at least thinks that Squirrel's going to get it done in receptions and yards, and apparently he does not share my concern about anybody eating into Squirrel White's snap count. So you guys are locked there. That brings us to sacks, John, and I think this was, as I thought about this podcast, I thought this maybe had the best chance for any number of directions here, because if you go back to last season, Byron Young was undeniably Tennessee's best pass rusher, but he's in the NFL now. And then you look at it last year, and there was more than a half dozen guys who finished the season with either 2 or 3 sacks. But then there was nobody until you jump up to Byron Young, who had 7 sacks. And several of those guys that had 2 or 3 sacks last year are back this season. So any number of ways you can go here. I'm batting leadoff. I say this one without a ton of conviction, not because I don't think he's going to play well, but I think there's 5 or 6 guys that could lead in this category. I'm going to go with Tyler Barron, who is probably going to start on the strong side off the edge. He had 2.5 sacks last season. Veteran guy, 4th year in the program. Again, I don't know that he can match the Byron Young total of 7 sacks last year. I don't know that anybody on this team can. But Tyler Barron had 4 sacks 2 years ago, 2.5 last year. I feel like he might be the safest pick of the bunch. And so I might have gone out on a limb with a couple of these other guys, but I'll take the safe option, I feel like, in Tyler Barron, who did have 2.5 sacks last season.
I don't know if there is a safe option here.
That's probably true. Yeah.
I think I'll go right back to Aaron Beasley.
Thought about him. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just think, and again, maybe I'm putting too much weight on the Orange Bowl, but his ability to make plays, I think that was very apparent. He made more plays than his predecessor at the position, who opted out of the game, Jeremy Banks. It shows that position lends itself to big plays, and sacks, of course, are big plays. And maybe they will find ways to even expand his role, Aaron Beasley, to make him a threat in the pass rush. Tennessee needs a better pass rush overall. And I think perhaps he's a guy to which you would look and say, okay, how can we put him in a position to make some sacks? So I'll go with Aaron Beasley.
I thought about him too. I think he would have been my number 2 choice, John. It sort of depends how much they blitz with him. Tennessee relied on its pass rush, its blitz packages a lot last year because they were really vulnerable in the back end of that defense. If they need to do that a lot this year and be aggressive on defense, blitz a lot, I think Beasley's got a good chance because he's going to be freed up at that weak side position to really get after it. He had 2 sacks against Clemson in the Orange Bowl, had a sack against South Carolina last November. So we didn't see him a ton in that role last year because he was in the middle linebacker spot for most of the season, while Banks was in more of that freewheeling weak side role. But a full year playing from the weak side, depending on the number of blitz packages Tennessee dials up for him, that could be a pretty good choice, I think.
Yeah, I wouldn't be totally surprised if DBs figure in those sack totals as well, because Tim Banks, the defensive coordinator, has been really creative about blitzes, and a number of defensive coordinators now find ways to get their DBs in position to make sacks. It's the goal is to confuse the quarterback and to make him. where he doesn't know where the pressure could be coming from. And sometimes it could come late, sometimes it could come early. So you get the DBs involved. But I guess we're talking about a pass rush by committee. I mean, there's no Will Anderson out there that's just going to dominate the charge against an opposing quarterback.
Yeah, and for that matter, there's no Derek Barnett. There's no Darrell Taylor going back a few years ago for Tennessee, who led them in sacks a couple years in a row. And there's no Byron Young even. I think I would say Tennessee's sacks leader will have fewer than 7 sacks, which was Byron Young's total last season. Would you agree with that, John, or do you think that the leader, whoever it is, will exceed that 7 sack total of Byron Young?
I think it would be close. I think probably will be right around there, 6, 7, 8. But I also think the overall sack total will be higher. It needs to be higher.
Yeah, I could buy that. I think it'll come up just shy of 7 for the leader, but the team total might be a couple of sacks higher. Adam, I knew there was going to be one where Adam would show us up, show he's the smartest guy. Of course, it's easy to do when you're mailing in the statement, right? But Adam went in an entirely different direction here. He goes with Arizona State transfer interior defensive lineman Omar Norman Lott. Adam says Norman Lott, despite being an interior defensive lineman, is a better pass rusher than he is a run stopper. He's more of a pass rush guy. So he's had 2 sacks each of the last 2 seasons for Arizona State, so 4 sacks the last 2 years. Defensive line coach Rodney Gardner has consistently referred to him as a slippery player. I guess that's a good thing, right? You're trying to slip past the the offensive line. So Adam taking the unconventional choice here. I think going with an interior defensive lineman, the transfer Omar Norman Lott.
Yeah, that he may have forced that one. I think that was I think
he's reaching.
Yeah, I think what he was trying to do there to show I'm smarter than these guys. Here's why. And let's face it, 7, 8, 9 weeks from now, nobody's going to remember who picked whom. So probably
you don't give Tennessee fans enough credit, John. Somebody's bookmarking this right now, and it's going to come back at us early in November and try to tell us we're all idiots, which, based on your and I's email inbox, is a daily occurrence, right?
Sure, yeah.
All right, I got one more for us. This one is a little bit different because we expect Joe Milton will be the starting quarterback, enough that he's going to lead the team in passing yards. So it's kind of silly to have a pick where we all take Milton to lead in passing yards. So instead of picking who will lead in passing yards, I've got a number set here for Milton. 3,000 yards. Will Joe Milton be the next 3,000-yard passer for Josh Heupel? For reference, Hendon Hooker threw for 31-35 last year, but it's worth keeping in mind Hooker did not play against Vanderbilt, did not play in the bowl game to get to that total. So Milton could average fewer yards per game and still get to 3,000 yards as long as he were to play wire to wire and not be out like Hooker was for 2 games with injury. For additional reference, John, there were 5 SEC quarterbacks last season that threw for at least 3,000 yards. Stetson Bennett was the conference's leader in passing yards. Of course, he was helped by the fact that he played 15 games. Georgia won the national championship, so he had a little more time to do it. Will Rogers, Bryce Young, Hendon Hooker, Spencer Rattler also threw for at least 3,000 yards. So Joe Milton, yay or nay, he will throw for at least 3,000 yards. What say you?
In Josh Heupel's offense, we've already talked about how good the receiving core is. If Joe Milton doesn't hit that 3,000-yard mark, I think the offense might be a bit of a disappointment. Now, they could run the ball. The counterpoint to this is that Tennessee could run the ball more. That I go back when I look at what Josh Heupel did at Central Florida. There was one of those years where he leaned heavily on the run. He had like a 4-man rotation in there, really rushed for a lot of yards, and there was quite a drop off in passing yardage. So that's a possibility. But you're basically saying you want your quarterback to throw for 250 yards a game. I think Joe Milton will do that. He may have some games close, 380, maybe pushing 400 or something. But the balance aspect of it, that makes it not a sure thing. That Tennessee could still be successful. I think I'm contradicting myself. It could still be successful if they runs the ball really well and Joe Milton throws for maybe 240, 245 yards per game.
Well, and even 240, as long as Tennessee plays in a bowl game and Milton plays in all those games, he needs to average 231 a game to get to, if he's playing in 13 games. That's the key there. If he plays in all 13 games, if he averages 231 a game passing, he will top 3,000 yards. I think he does that. I actually think he surpasses Hendon Hooker's total passing yards amount. I don't know that he will exceed Hendon Hooker's per game total. I tend to think not. But because Hooker did not play in 2 games, I think that gives the opportunity for Milton to just barely pass Hooker's season total. And so much of my answer here is yeah, it's based on some of what we saw from Milton in the Orange Bowl, but it's also based on Josh Heupel's track record. You go back to Drew Lock when Heupel was the offensive coordinator at Missouri. Lock threw for almost 4,000 yards with Heupel as his offensive coordinator. Dylan Gabriel at UCF twice threw for more than 3,500 yards as Heupel's starting quarterback. Then you add in Hendon Hooker, despite being out with injury for 2 games. He threw for more than 3,100 yards. So the track record is there that if you're the starter in Josh Heupel's system, there's a really good chance you're going to throw for at least 3,000. So I agree with you. I say Joe Milton does it. I say that he actually exceeds Hendon Hooker's total passing yardage without exceeding Hendon Hooker's yards per game total.
Yeah, and I guess one other aspect of this you could look at is I think there are quite a few games on this schedule that won't be close. The first 2, for example, that how early would they take Joe Milton out of games and give Nico Iamaleava a chance to play some, because you want to develop your backup too in case Milton is injured. So he might miss some reps in the fourth quarter. I think 4 or 5 games on this schedule, he may not play beyond the third quarter. There's that possibility. I guess that's a best case Tennessee scenario, that 5 of the games they're already decided after the third quarter.
Well, and that might be influencing Adam's pick here as we wrap this up, because Adam, this is like the Price is Right total, where you come up just to the number and you go just over, stop short or something. Adam predicts just short of 3,000 yards for Joe Milton. Adam's number is 299.8, so 2 yards shy of hitting the 3,000 mark. I think maybe as I interpret Adam's thoughts here, I think he might be sharing your thought, John, of some possible blowout games against inferior opponents where maybe Joe Milton gets a quick hook, Nico gets some extended playing time, and piles up some big stats of his own in relief duty. And I also think Adam, from our previous conversations, I feel like he thinks Tennessee might be a little bit more reliant than usual even on its run game this year. But he's not really going in too much of a direction the other way there to say 29-98 is kind of the contrarian pick, I guess.
Well, I wonder, when I heard that 98 there at the end of his prediction, if this is really sort of a tip of the hat to the 25th anniversary of the 98 national championship team.
I bet that's what it is. Adam's playing chess. We're playing checkers. course, that's easier to do when you're mailing in your answers to the test. All right, Adam will hopefully be with us back next week. You can find all of his coverage as the preseason continues and the season opener gets closer over at KnoxNews.com. If you like what you hear on this podcast, we would appreciate it if you take a moment on your podcast app, give us a rating or review. Not only do we enjoy hearing your feedback on the podcast, but also those ratings and reviews are really helpful in allowing us to get in front of new listeners. And we will be back with you next week for another installment of the Volunteer State.